So it's been a while since I did an update video. Honestly, life has been a little hectic. I now have a near 2-year-old and a 7-month-old, I believe. And this was the worst flu season in like decades or something. So a lot of sickness and a lot of slowdowns in my work. But I'm back to development on the plugin more often now. And I wanted to go over some recent things that were added that I didn't go over in a video and might be a little confusing to people. So first of all, on the lever, I've added a momentum retention mode so that you can use it like a door because I kept getting requests. The default doors right now are just physics constrained doors, which they're going to behave more naturally. You can block them with other objects and stuff like these. You can block them with these. This is by far the preferred way of doing it, but it's not ideal for all situations. And people that want a logic driven door, now you can just use a lever. I figured lever already has all the functionality of a door anyways. The only thing it was missing was momentum retention. So now you can set it to retain momentum on release. And I have a static friction coefficient on it, and you can set the friction to a different amount. And this is a fairly decently high friction. If you set it lower, then this would swing farther when you release. I have a max momentum variable that you can set in the lever so that you can keep it from just swinging one side to the other. And I mean, it pretty much works as you would expect. It stops at the extents that you set for the lever, so it won't go any farther than 90. It won't go any farther than 90 the other way. You set to 0, so you can open the door and then close it back to 0. Pretty simple. Really only works on the X and Y axis for this because it doesn't really make too much sense on the other axes, and they're harder to implement anyways. So for right now, up and down, left and right, that's what you can use it with. Next up is grip pausing. This is useful for things like snapping to highlight to like a highlighted area. You want to snap your grip to there to show you can leave it here, and then you let go, it's staying there. Or you can pull it away, whatever. So grip pausing lets you pause the grip. It no longer runs any grip logic on the grip when it's paused, and you can manually move it, do whatever you want during that duration. It has options to leave the physics constraint active if it's a physics grip, so it'll just float in air and you can still bump it around and stuff, or completely destroy the physics grip and just literally freeze the object in the air there. So like for this one, I set up this little test overlap dummy thing. You overlap it, it shows whatever object you overlapped it, auto scales it to the base, and then freezes the grip in the air. So I'm still gripping it right now, but it's frozen. And I let go of my grip, it'll drop. You could do something like if it's within this area, then it's frozen, and you snap into the location there. And if it's outside of that area, then the grip comes back. Whatever you wanted to do. Something else that's cool is the actual base I have here. This is actually a little special. It took a little bit of work to get going correctly. I work off of the world bounds of the objects, and I scale them automatically so they fit best onto this base here. And it's actually a little difficult to get working correctly. It works with any mesh now, and it'll scale so that it fits directly over this base centered and scaled to the base. Like if I covered up the door. If I took the door and put it here, it'd be a tall door, but it'd be stuck within the extents of this mesh. And it has a variable for a boundary edge, a border, that it'll scale down inside of within it too. I actually like this. You can have it set for any mesh on construction script, so it'll just show up as like a glowing, I don't know what to call it, scanline version of the mesh. And then that's what you're supposed to overlap there. It's a gun, or you're supposed to overlap the block there instead, or whatever. Replicate movement. So in Engine, it's always been possible to turn off movement replication for actors, like this gun's an actor. But for components, it's never existed. And recently they went in and they added component replication as its own variable, a boolean that you can set on root components for actors or just components themselves. I believe this is a new addition. I remember it being added in. And it causes some problems with attachments specifically. So let's say you were to make an inventory attachment and you want to attach a actor to your body. Well, normally it's going to use replicate movement. So when you go and attach it, it's still replicating movement, and when you unattach it, it's replicating movement. But the weird thing with how they handle attachment is for right when you detach it, before it's actually updated, it sends a 0 transform to the clients. So when you detach it, it flies to 0 in the world, or just spawns at 0 in the world and then flies back to you. And that's because on detach, it's zeroing out the transform and replicating it for 1 frame for some reason. Now to fix this, normally you would assume, well, I'll just turn off replicate movement, and then it won't matter. It's just the client side's location of it because it's unattached, and when you detach it, hey, it's there. And that would normally work, except for the fact that actor replicate movement's kind of broken with root components. And you can get around it by ticking on replicate on the root component itself, but there's no option to turn off replicate movement on root components, or components in general. So I went in and I added all the grippables, including the grippable actors, and made the root components for grippable actors and the grippable components have replicate movement, and you can untick it. So now you have full control over movement replication like it was an actor, but as a component. It probably wouldn't be an issue with grips that are actually still replicating movement when you detach them, because it would correct. It actually replicate the new location after detach. But since most of the grips are run client side, so you don't have to worry about delay for client-side authoritative, or you don't have to worry about the honestly really bad position replication and latency of server replication for movement. Then when you grip it, it's turning off movement replication, which is probably why that 0 transform sneaks in right before that's turned off. So this fixes that. If you go into actor, go to the root component for a grippable, and set component replicates and replicate movement to off, then when you go to attach to an inventory system or whatever, then it should work correctly in detach. And you can always turn on replicate movement again after detaching for, when you want to go and throw the object. I thought that this required some explanation because it's a little obtuse what the point of me adding this option was, and it was to fix an engine bug that's kind of hard for Epic to know about because it involves how I specifically turn off movement replication to get client-side movement, which is not a standard thing in the engine. First-person shooters don't really require that kind of thing, but in VR, it's very useful. I'll do that one last. Let's go to movement action list. So perform move actions. This has been something that's been in the plugin for a while now. I think 2 versions since 4.17, where I had movement actions, which are a way of performing actions for movement or whatever you want in line with the movement replication system. Normally in UE4, if you wanted to do something like a dash, or you wanted to do something like, not a jump, because jump's already in, but let's say you wanted to do a jump that pauses and goes down, or some kind of weird custom movement, it's really hard to do in Blueprint. And it's even hard to do in C++. You have to add a new enum to the fsave movement. I don't remember the name of the structure right now. It's like a byte that stores gameplay flags. You have to add a new enum flag to it, and you have to replicate that down, then you have to perform logic when it's returned, which means custom C++ work. And as far as I'm aware, there's no direct Blueprint method of multiplayer movement that's in line with the rollback and correctly replicated movement system and engine until now in this plugin with this. So move actions are there to fill in that gap, and in C++ and Blueprint to where you can do movement actions without directly editing the character source and overriding functions, and without a lot of effort and work. And I have a bunch of default ones for you. Dog's eating a bone. So perform movement action custom. This is the one that people will be most interested for their own implementations. It can take a vector and a rotator and then a custom. I think I have 10 custom options. So you can go 1 through 10 for move action customs. So it gives you 10 possibilities. Plus, then you could branch out from that with like using one of the variables as additional info. So whatever you want to do, and it will throw an event on custom move action or something like that. I don't remember in the character, and let you perform logic when that move action is applied. And that move action will be applied in line with the movement system, so the client and the server will play it back in sequence correctly. So there should be no rollback if you do your own logic correctly, and it should act just like an official F-save movement move action, like jumping or I guess a dash or whatever. So customs there for whatever you want to put in. Set rotation's a new one in 4.19. It's not out yet. This is part of this thing here that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. So that will just set your character's rotation in line with the move action system, so there's no rollback, no problems. Snap turn, standard VR snap turn, facing this way, 45-degree snap turn, you're facing that way. That's just a way of doing it. You can also use that for smooth rotation by using the frame delta and performing a snap turn based off of the speed and the delta time. That was more expensive prior to this, but it will be cheaper after that is in fully, so I wouldn't worry about too much. That would be the way to do smooth rotation. Move action stop all movement. Stops all movement for the character. So normally the blueprint method of doing this is either the server stops all movement and then tells the client about it, or the client stops all movement, tells the server about it, and there's an out of sequence issue there and delay. So you can do the move action here, and it will perform it in line with the movement system and stop all movement. It's better. Move action teleport fixes the same problem with teleporting. In multiplayer, if you're just going to call the teleport function on the server, client doesn't know about it yet, so client's going to get teleported later after the server teleports them. They may have moved farther or done something, suddenly they're teleported. It's weird, and the server may roll back some of their movements. If their movements are sent in later, then it can cause problems. So instead, we have perform move action teleport, where the client actually teleports and then tells the server, I teleported on this frame, before I did these movements. And the server plays that back, and it plays it back the same way the client did, and it shouldn't have issues with rollback then, and it shouldn't have stuttering and weird teleportation issues. In 4.18 base and early 4.19, teleport and snap turn teleport just took a rotation and location, and it only replicated the location because rotation was handled by the client. This changes that. I'll get that in a second. Sorry, I'm still a little sick. Yeah, but that's move actions. They're there for you guys. It's not really necessarily VR, but it's something that was extremely missing in the engine for characters. It's probably something that Epic should have some kind of version of in the default character. Not entirely sure why they never did. I'm assuming it's because they do all their own games in C++ for the characters, and they never thought about the need for it. This is something that honestly should be in by default, but whatever. Okay, rotation rollback. So one of the problems with this originally in 4.18, 4.19 for multiplayer was, let's say you were doing smooth turning. Client's telling the server it's smooth turning, it's moving, everything's fine, but then there's packet loss. So in the middle of turning, the client skips a packet, the server doesn't get it. Server's like, oh, client is shifting wrong, because the client is rotation authoritative in engine by default. Rotation never gets rolled back when there's a correction that's passed on to the client. So the problem with VR with this character is that I actually do leave the headset offset from the 0 point of the actor for the VR character. For the simple VR character, it's 0 point of the actor, and it just moves the actor. But I wanted to be able to do more, so the VR character has advanced features because I disassociate the 0 point and the HMD location, but it's also significantly harder to accomplish and pull off everything I want to do like that in multiplayer. I feel it's worth it in the end, so I had to go through this. So when you do a rotation in VR with an offset HMD, you want to rotate around the HMD's location. But since you're offset from your 0 point, that means you also have to move the actor so that it rotates around the HMD so you stay in place. Otherwise, you're rotating that root and you're swinging your body around in an arc around that root. So what would happen when you missed a packet is it would send the snap turn or delta or whatever. It'd miss a packet, but the client still replicates the new rotation on the next frame because client's rotation authoritative. So the server would see the character without the movement offset suddenly rotate around like this. And the server checks the new location after it runs all the movement against what the client sent in. And since the client had that extra offset and the server didn't, the server's like, oh, they're offset by, like 2 feet from where they should be. I'm going to correct them. And it send a correction, which would move the client to where the server thinks they should be, but the server doesn't know about that additional offset. So, I mean, you could just start like rotating around, warping around if you're missing packets, and it's just an issue. So what I did in a custom branch that's not out yet is I scrapped the client authority on rotation, and I rolled in rotation into the client correction that the server sends. And I check if the client's rotation is significantly different from what the server's rotation is. And I will roll back the client to the correct rotation. And instead of just sampling and setting what the client sends to me as rotation every frame, instead I play back all the move actions that got to that rotation, just like all normal character movement, so that I can know if there's truly a difference. This way, if there's a missed frame, the server simply corrects the client back to where it should be, but there is no offset and there is no weird warping. It's going to need some more tweaking and significant testing since it's a large change to the core version of how UE4 handles client rollback and correction. But I think it's going to be worth it in the end. It's going to let me do a lot of more advanced things because I don't think that VR with an offset root should have client authoritative rotation since, you have that offset problem. And being able to scrap all of that, not only is it going to simplify things, but make it a lot easier to do, like custom move actions and stuff in the future for people. So there's that. Next plans for the engine are to finish the rotation rollback. A few people ran into it recently, so I decided to move it higher up the list. I'd known about it for a couple weeks, couple months, I don't know. Enough amount of time that it was on my list of stuff to handle soon. And then I have some other more advanced things, like some things I'd really like to get to in the gripping system. I spent a good month researching really hacky alternative ways to handle gripping that would have been more in line with what you can do in Unity. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to come to a good solution in UE4 just because of how its inheritance system works, and the fact that you can't actually attach scripts to objects, and everything has to roll through a component which has overhead. I decided to scrap the idea for now. I had a somewhat workable system that would have been fine, but it would have been very difficult to roll in blueprints to it, and I don't want to limit any part of the plugin to pure C++. So for now, I'm not going to go into the really crazy gripping system that I dreamed of, but, it is what it is. There's not much I can do about that. But I'll keep working at the plugin. I should be back to more full-time development on it again. Now that work slowed down a little bit and sickness is almost over in my household. Although, as you can tell, it's not completely gone. And I'll keep you guys up to date, and I'll see you around.